I have a thing I like to say about theme is like a dead body. It's got to be buried deep enough or it stinks. Because otherwise it becomes preachy. You start bending the medium of film specifically to be something that it isn't. Like you're starting to get into sermon territory where you're just straight up telling people just straight truths.
Hello and welcome to StoryFellas, a podcast where we make stories and we break stories. I'm your host, Tommy Antonucci.
And I'm your host, Zach Lovelace.
Zach, I got to do the show intro. I'll get it down. Guys, normally in the show, we take an hour to improvise a story idea from scrap ideas or randomly generated prompts. However, today's a little different. We're actually going to discuss the subject of theme. It's something that we talk about a lot on the show, and Zach is the doctor of theme.
They call me Dr. Theme.
So today we're going to do a little discussion about theme. It might be a little crash course. We are by no means the ultimate authority on this, but just doing this for a while, we have some ideas of how it works. Before we dive in, Zach, how are you doing this fine morning?
Got your tea? You always hit me with the how am I? I'm good. Definitely tired. Family still recovering from being sick. The Lord was super kind and just completely had the sickness pass over me. So I've not been sick.
Did you have like lamb's blood above your door?
Yeah, I did, yeah. I don't know why. I keep asking, why? No, I think it's because he only lets me get sick on the weekend.
When you're going to have fun, it's like trying to wipe you out.
Yep. So that's where we're at. I mean, the Lovelace household has been very much about Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell, like things that are really easy, playing video games, stuff like that. When we're sick, we like to, like loosen the belt about a lot of stuff. So it's been nice. But what about you, man?
Doing well. I've been traveling lately. Last episode, I was in my janky travel video setup, but back home now, just trying to iron out things because it's been like half week here, half week not here, so just catching up on chores and stuff. But I think this weekend is the first weekend in a while that we don't have anything in the books per se,
I love
which
those
is
weekends,
always like you're like, whoa, because me and my wife Kelsey will always have a long calendar like written out on our marker board, and we're like, yeah, that weekend we're doing that weekend. Even if the month is empty, it usually fills up with something, Friends want to get together or we're traveling somewhere. So it's always nice where you look and you're like, oh, nothing's happening.
Oh, man.
And I think they'll be a little more common once we have our newborn, because I think all our plans will halt for a little bit and we'll just be like, it's just us doing this for a little bit.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So we're trying to get it in while we can, I suppose, just
rack up that sleep. Rack up that sleep. That's what you got to do.
Got to rack up that sleep.
Yeah, I'm excited for you guys. I know that we've barely talked about it on the mic, but off mic we talk about it a lot. But it's a big deal, big story about to happen. Pull it back into the theme of the show. But yeah,
we're excited. So I'll call you Zach afterwards. I'm like, how'd you do it, man? How'd you do it?
I didn't.
Turns out you were a ghost all along.
Yeah,
I've been talking to.
I'm not real.
I go back and listen to all the podcast episodes, and it's just me talking to myself. Just long silences.
Yeah, I like that scene in Fight Club. Total spoiler, but where he like turns and he's like handing a beer to Tyler Durden or whatever, and he like hands it over and he just drops it.
You're like, oh. No, but it'll be fun. But I think today we're going to talk a little bit about theme. I think that will be fun.
Yeah.
And I've posed this as an interview. I will still chime in, but I will be asking you questions since you are Dr. Theme, and getting your 2 cents and enlightening our audience into the world that is theme in stories.
Yeah, we talk about theme very often, which is, if you listen to the show, obviously, if you're just jumping into this show, we usually do tell a story, and just within that mechanics, we bring it up and we talk about it because we're always moving it up and down throughout the timeline of the story, and like, how hard do you need to go in the theme? What is the theme? It really helps you decide. Like it is kind of the Bible, so to speak, of the universe.
Yes.
the universal truths of the universe. There's a lot of people who talk about it just up front, people that have influenced me, how I got my doctorate in theme. K.M. Weiland is a great writer and author about storycraft, and then same with Robert McKee. And then I've also read Script Shadow, which is probably the one that people know the least of. The other two, if you're in writing for a while, you'll bump into them. Robert McKee wrote a big book called Story. Literally it's like this thick, and he just breaks down like the mechanics of story from Aristotle, Plato, all the way down to Hollywood, and gives you like a real nuts and bolts look at that stuff. And then K.M. Weiland does the same kind of stuff. And I can't remember the name of her main book, but Script Shadow is a blog by a fellow named Carson, which I think is a pseudonym, and he's out in Hollywood, and it's all about screenwriting. And it's just he'll review scripts, or he'll review movies. People will submit scripts. I actually did submit a script to like a contest thing he did, and it made the top 25 of his thing. And it was like an 88-page Western. So I made it like the thinnest, like absolutely stripped down version of a Western. But he talks a lot about goals, stakes, and urgency in terms of like a film, not just a story. Because something that we've done here is open up the test kitchen, if you will, of StoryFellas to be less about film, so centrically about film, but about comics, TV. We've done TV episodes. The last episode we just did like something that was a comic, which I think we kind of came down that it was probably better as like an animated TV show. But still, like story as it applies across the board. But those three are the biggest influences on me. So if you want to like follow what it is that I'm saying, or you want to know more about what it is I'm saying, go a little deeper, check them out. That's scriptshadow.net, I think. I know .net. He's been around for a while. And then Story by Robert McKee, and then K.M. Weiland. She has her own blog. Yeah, so theme is really just a controlling idea. Again, like the universal truths. And so whenever you and I are talking, it's always, we can think of some cool idea, like last episode was a guy who got turned into like a stretchy superhero type character. And it's like, okay, what does that actually mean? And like, what does it mean for the world and the story? And we're kind of always negotiating that. That's basically what StoryFellas is. So that's why you're like, hey, Dr. Theme over here. It's because that's just what I'm so focused on, is the foundational element of the story. What are we actually saying? Good example would be something like forgiveness, where, like a story about forgiveness or revenge. A classic example, revenge is bad. That it's not just revenge is the subject, the kind of the end of the pool you're playing in with the theme, but like, what are you saying about revenge specifically? That's your perspective as the writer. That revenge kills two people at the end. It's often like a Western theme anyway, where like somebody goes hardcore trying to get revenge, and they kind of destroy their own life at the same time, trying to destroy someone else.
So you're saying like revenge is bad could be a theme in a story. That it's a simple idea that dictates. Yeah,
it's a point of view on the subject. The subject being, again, like pretty much anything. Family, like, well, what about family? Well, family is the best way to go through trauma, or something like that. I'm sure you could probably dig deeper. But there's a quote that comes up a lot, and for K.M. Weiland that I think about quite often when it comes to this kind of stuff. And usually if I'm lost about like, oh, what should happen next in the plot? What should, this character, like what kind of characters should we introduce, like supporting characters, that kind of stuff, that she says plot, character, and theme are not individual isolated aspects of your story. They cannot be developed in isolation. They're actually all the same thing, just expressed in different ways. So for instance, that forgiveness thing, like if you have a character who's very unforgiving, to tell a good story, to have a dialogue, which means having at least two people talking, not a monologue, you would need to have someone having an opposing point of view throughout the story. So that's usually an antagonist. or it's a supporting character who has like a slightly different point of view on whatever it is, forgiveness, like, oh, I think forgiveness, people need to earn forgiveness, or whatever.
Yeah.
Just a slightly different point of view, so that when your main character is processing this and encountering, being challenged on this over and over again, that's what's doing the challenging, is the antagonist or the supporting characters that are helping them along. An old term that gets lost a little bit in the subject is about theme is foil, like a foil character. So like, this is a character, your main character, wants to take revenge. The foil character would be somebody who comes in and is like, revenge is wrong. Like we should never, like, kill someone out of revenge. Whereas another character might be somebody who's like, but justice is needed here. So it's like, there's a difference between justice. I think that's in Batman Begins. Like, there's a difference between justice and harmony and revenge, basically. And Batman gets challenged or Bruce Wayne gets challenged as he's kind of developing Batman, of like, you really just want revenge. You don't want justice at all. So anyway, this is me monologuing. You caught me monologuing.
No, I think that's my first question was going to be, what is theme? And I think that is a nice comprehensive understanding of base level what theme is. Coming back real quick before we leave it, the foil character, I know you've talked about, would you consider them, a lot of times you'll throw in a character like that in our stories that is opposite the protagonist, or they reacted to the same circumstance opposite of the protagonist. And usually they are evil in some capacity, and they are, if our protagonist makes the same choices, they will become like this evil character, and if they choose a better path, they will become good. Is that kind of the same category of that foil in your mind?
Agreed. Oh, totally. Yeah, that's a perfect way to do it. I think we've talked about Spider-Man and Green Goblin before, where they both experience loss of some kind, like the world pushes back on them.
Yeah.
Norman loses his job. Well, I guess he kind of loses his job because he loses his job before he becomes the Green Goblin, and that kind of sets him in motion, like the desperate efforts to kind of, be successful. And Spider-Man does the same thing, but instead, with great power comes great responsibility. That's the main theme of the first. I'm thinking of the Spider-Man Sam Raimi movie, but the idea that they view the same kind of event in life differently. There's a classic one that gets bumped around that's just like that. Like, in terms of a supervillain, it's like they want to fix the world, whereas a superhero wants to save the world. And so it's just a very slight different thing.
The thing that comes to mind for me out of the stories we told is an early one, Cadby. I think we created a ringleader of a circus that he runs away to, and they both had the ability to read minds, except the ringleader becomes jaded and basically uses people. And then Cadby, because it's like, the outside world is mean to us, where he has to make a decision. Will he adopt that perspective that the ringleader has, or will he come up with a healthier perspective of the world and of others? I think that's really cool, because it's putting, and that goes back to what you're saying about your theme and your characters not growing in silos. Like, that is by the very nature, you're growing. This character is based in the theme, and he's the opposite version of the guy that you're trying to tell the story through. I think that is important to grow all three aspects.
Because a story, it relies on conflict.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of times, like, first timers or like student filmmakers, they'll try to tell a story that doesn't have any actual conflict. It's like a character who doesn't want anything, doesn't do anything, is like extremely passive. And so it's hard to challenge them and push them, because that's what you're doing. And I mean, I don't know why psychologically writers don't want to do that when they first start out, and they just don't know any better. I don't know, but I know I did that too. It's like self-indulgent, kind of like just characters walking around moping and whatever. It's like being sad, because being sad is serious, and serious is important. And whatever.
I think having too healthy of characters sometimes hurts the story, because that was the first draft because I actually wrote Cadby as a feature, and I think I said that on the episode that they were just all too normal and good. Like they were kind of characters that were healthy enough that you're like, hey, you should change this. And you're like, you're right. I should change that. And it's like, that's not interesting. Like if they just
Yeah.
can change too quickly and they're too nice and they don't have any tension between each other, like you need that conflict for them to overcome to help convey the theme of the story.
Yeah. Because nobody wants to watch a character who's given things, for one. Like they don't earn it, basically. That's not interesting. They're without any suffering, there's no story, basically. And that's a way larger conversation, different podcast, but that is what makes it interesting. And that's what makes you trust a character, and like you are endeared to them because you are watching someone like yourself. Like that's really what it is. It's like you suffer. You're like, I try and lose weight and I realize it's not that easy. I have to like really, really work at it. As somebody who just like gets up and is like, oh, I should lose a few pounds. And then they just do. Like they don't change their behavior or anything. A lot of it, and again, if you've bopped around in the Storycraft circles for a while, you'll know that a character has a lie that they believe typically. So that kind of goes back to what you're saying about healthy or unhealthy, that like you're going to pick an unhealthy person to talk about, at least in some way. They don't need to be like toxic. They don't need to be evil, but they just need to believe something either about themselves. Like, hey, I don't think I can do this. Like I'm not strong enough. You see that theme all the time. They find out that they are strong enough.
Yeah.
Usually
I do have a beef when it is like superpower level and they're just at Doctor Strange.
Doctor Strange, yes.
Like there's a lot in that movie I don't like, and I think we've ranted about this movie before. But the ending, spoilers, mild spoilers, where there's a person that's literally it. Like they have superpowers and they're not powerful enough to do the thing, and then Doctor Strange is like, "You can do it," and then she can, and it's like, okay, like that's not. I get that you're disguising it in the believing of yourself gives you more power, but when you have a tangible thing like superpowers, it's just like, oh, I just push harder and I can do the thing that I don't like that. I don't like that personally.
No, me neither. Because you bring it down a notch and it's like, okay, let's say she was a good athlete. Something that's just like way more recognizable to us and quantifiable. It's like, okay, I can't make this many baskets. Well, what do you need to be doing? You need to be practicing.
Yeah.
Like, so were there training sequences where it's like really obvious what it was, like that level that she wasn't hitting, it's like, oh, I can't do this because then that's the problem. Like however you choose to answer that question, I can't do this because X.
Yeah. And believing in yourself has a small out, like if you're a runner and then you're like, I'm going to believe in myself more, it might increase you like 1%, but you shouldn't be able to just instantly like run twice as fast as everyone else.
Yeah. And have like godlike powers, I think is the thing too.
Yeah.
Like, being able to open portals and all sorts of other stuff. It's stuff it's so unrelatable to us because, well, I mean, I don't know what it's like to open a portal. I know what it's like to open a door, but yeah, like really showing us that it hurt her would have been helpful. Or like why she didn't believe in herself.
Yeah.
I don't think it really even covered like why she didn't, other than it was like, because she just kind of shows up in the story. Man, that movie sucks.
Guys, message us. Let us know your thoughts on Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness in the comments below.
Speaking of Sam Raimi, we just like bookended Sam Raimi's movies where it's like Spider-Man, which is like so solid. And I mean, it was coasting on, 40 years at that point of like that character being around and character arcs. And that's the thing with superheroes specifically in comic books is like you usually get like that main kind of like arc prime, so to speak. There's like, okay, things that are like, that is what Spider-Man is about. These are the storylines. These are the big ones that people liked. All the other stuff kind of fades away. And then they just the character dies when people start to just retell those same lines again. Where it's, oh, here's Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy's going to die. Uncle Ben is going to die. Oh yeah, you remember that time that the symbiote suit got on Spider-Man? We're going to tell that story again. So anyway, that's just within comic books, the publication. Just we talked about this in the last episode by choosing to do it as a comic book. It's like you can kind of get away with not having anything change because comics are just about like either the one-off
Hmm.
like this, Spider-Man fighting Rhino,
Hmm.
or there are like really big arcs that are happening, but they're happening so slowly. Like,
Yeah.
you're just drawing it out because a superhero has to fight somebody,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, I'm gonna steer us back towards theme. We're
Yes. Yeah.
diving deep into the Spider-Man lore.
We are. Yeah.
But my next question that I have, which we kind of answered a little bit, but just to put a pin in it, is theme the same thing as the agenda of the story? Is it tied to what the story is trying to convey to the audience, or can it be independent?
Hmm.
Do you think it's always tied to the message like you're trying to deliver to the audience?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the point.
Hmm.
Like, at the very least, it's the foundation that you're standing on to then tell the message, like your point of view on it. You're announcing to people in some ways that, like, okay, the story is about forgiveness. Boom. And then it's like, well, what about forgiveness?
Yeah.
That's your theme. Boom. And so then every scene should be testing your character, or allowing them to fail, in pursuit of change as the theme has described it. So like somebody who's becoming more forgiving, or who's getting over like some traumatic event in their life or whatever. Like a lot of characters, that's what it is like, kind of a over psychological type thing where it's like, oh, daddy didn't love me. And then, the story is about them like then being able to overcome those ideas.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would say it's the same thing.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. This is, I feel like, an interesting question, but is the theme within a story objective, or can it be interpreted by the audience? Because I have a thought on
Definitely,
this, but I want
yeah,
to hear
it's
your
definitely
thought.
going to be interpreted by the audience regardless.
Hmm.
Everybody just views a film differently. You can try your best as a director, to like put your, and the writer, obviously, like,
Hmm.
state your theme, express your theme. Hopefully they walk away with the majority of people being pretty obvious.
Hmm.
So I would say yes. It is objective. I mean, it has to be when you're making the film anyway. Like that's
Hmm.
what determines the color of the curtains in the background.
Hmm.
Like it goes that far down.
Hmm.
You see so many cool videos online nowadays where people are studying the color theory of like Hitchcock films and stuff. And it's like, oh, look, this character is represented by green. It's
Hmm.
like, well, they chose that because of they're trying to communicate something. They didn't
Hmm.
just like arbitrarily say like, that guy's green.
Hmm.
It's like what green kind of represents.
Hmm.
Um, Not to say that like green can't represent something for somebody else, but just
Hmm.
generally speaking, you're dealing with symbols,
Hmm.
with film, especially because you're talking about a visual medium. So, yeah, I hope that answers that.
Yeah. I think ideally a film should have an objective theme. I don't know if it always does. I feel like the softer the theme, then the more abstract things are, and the more you're like, what is happening? And like, that's up to the director, I suppose. There are experimental films that almost have no theme at all, but then, I don't know, that's not always, it's sometimes fun to watch, but not my cup of tea, because it's like, what are we saying? Like sometimes
Yeah.
you want to know what we're saying. And even it doesn't have to be on that extreme either, where it's someone could just be wielding theme incorrectly. Like you said, they're not fusing it with their characters, they're not fusing it with their plot, where they, in their head, they're like, this is the theme. But the story doesn't clearly actually interpret that or convey that. So I think ideally, to have a strong backbone of a story, the theme should be objective, and everyone's going to interpret it different ways. I like in that sense, it's subjective. Someone could walk out there like, I think they're saying revenge is good, and then their friends are like, but they pursued revenge and lost everyone they loved and then died in the end. Like, why do you think they're saying that's good? So it's subjective in the sense that they're not just like beating you over the head with it, ideally. But like you said, I think most people would reasonably be able to walk out and they say, oh, I think that movie is pro-family, or it is anti-government, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it's super cut and dry objective in the sense that everyone will always agree on it. But I think that in some ways should be the goal of the filmmaker, to try to make it, if they're trying to make a point with a film, it should
Yeah.
be fairly clear what.
And that doesn't mean like there's a difference between making a point, because every film does,
Yeah.
even down to, Star Wars, where it's like, he's not, George Lucas isn't trying to I mean, maybe in some ways, I guess, but not trying to like state anything super big or unobvious, or like make a point. Because there's a difference between that and like a message film. That's become really popular in the past few years, where it's like, it's almost like Christian films where you watch it and you're like, oh man, okay, you're getting beaten over the head with this, like you said. That the filmmaker had a message, and I'm walking away and I know exactly what it was. I have a thing I like to say about theme is like a dead body. It's got to be buried deep enough or it stinks. Because otherwise it becomes preachy. You start bending the medium of film specifically to be something that it isn't. Like you're starting to get into sermon territory where you're just straight up telling people just straight truths. And so being able to be more crafty, basically, not in a bad way. That makes it sound like, like sneaky. But like if you have something you want to say that's like a really big kind of hard pill to swallow, like come up with a really good story and show it to me. Don't say it to me. I mean, that's like the classic cinematic rule, obviously. Like show me how that truth really does work.
Yes.
And if it can't, and you have to like bend reality and get people to be kind of less human in your story, then it maybe isn't true. Like, it kind of rings as untrue and people don't resonate with it unless it's something that, again, kind of to pick on the Christian films, it's like, unless you already believe it, then you're willing to forgive, no pun intended, like the bad craft of the film. And you're like, okay, the message that it's telling me is beating me over the head. Oh, I don't care because I already believe this. Yeah. And that's just preachy. Like,
yeah. I actually, my next question was about your quote, theme is like a dead body, which is funny. You beat me to it. I agree. And I think rather than the show or rather than the tell me, show me, I think of Bo Burnham's Welcome to the Internet song from his Inside special. Because if you've not seen it, he is playing a song and he is personifying the internet. Like his character is the internet. And he's basically a like carny con salesman kind of vibe, but he's trying to promote like, hey, you should use the internet, and he's listing all the things that could happen. And I think that's a very powerful message, is playing the villain like very truthfully. Like you could do this, and some movies do it poorly, where you take a certain person, like let's say a Christian or an atheist, and you just make them like the most evil person ever. And it's like, okay, well, that's not even believable. However, if you do it well, like Bo Burnham, where he's truthfully listing, these are all the things the internet can do. He's not lying about anything. And he's like, isn't it great? And then you walk away, you're like, no, it's not. Like, I don't like that I'm being coerced to join, hop onto the internet like this. And I think it can be super effective as long as you don't use hyperboles to convey like, oh, well, they're just bad, right? They're bad because, and for
that's a straw man.
Reasons. Yeah.
That's the straw man, and one of my favorite things to do is to steel man. So you present the strongest argument for the thing that you actually disagree with. So it is a very easy dialogue to put like a Christian and an atheist in a room together. But you need to be making Christian filmmakers fail here. And it's actually, they are a really good example of like people who fumble on theme. Because they're not willing to go a lot of times, not willing to go as hard and as consistent, I guess, like as an atheist would be for their own point of view, and presenting that and then letting that dictate the structure of the theme. Kind of getting to that initial quote from K.M. Weiland is like, that will then tell you the plot. That will then tell you the structure of the film. What characters to create. And of course, we are story making machines. Like, and I mean, even to say machine makes it sound like too mechanical. That is like who we are and what we do as humans and how we communicate. And so when you're making up a story, we do it all the time in StoryFellas. Like, just go pick a random episode and listen to it. Like, we'll just come up with characters and then adjust things along the way. Like, that's actually the fun of a first draft, is just like putting a bunch of stuff in place. And then the second draft, third draft, fourth draft down the line, you were drawing into further focus the things that you really want to say through all of these elements of your story. And yeah, like to be able to to look at your plot and say, okay, he actually needs to be challenged here. Otherwise I'm not being truthful. Like I'm not, I'm avoiding this. Or again, you're like reaching into preachy type territory. I'm being lazy, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to have my characters go. I'm being afraid, I guess, too. Like I'm not willing to have them go where they probably need to go.
And it's funny because in past episodes that happens, and I think you phrase it as the story wants to be this thing, which we run into because if you've listened, Zach tends to go to darker tones, and I try to keep it a little lighter, which I think is a good balance. But there are times where he pitches, I think this protagonist person has to die. Like, I remember one specifically, and spoilers for our own show, but Ambi Sinister. Like, we could not get that story to work. We're like, what is this guy doing? He's not doing anything. And then I think you said, I think you jokingly said, what if he just dies? Yeah. And then we both had this realization. It's like, oh, if he dies, it spurns all the other characters on to do something and to change. Totally. And while that feels like a drastic move, sometimes that's the big move. You need that heaviness to make everything else work.
Well, and to say that another way, we realized it wasn't that guy's story.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it was the other guy's story. And so that was the shift. Like we had actually started to write the story as if it was this bodyguard type character. And then for him to die, it started out as like presenting it as something cheap, but we went back and kind of snapped it back together as being like, no, the story was always going to go this way. And it was always going to challenge the main character, the guy who had the superpower gravitational device or whatever. Great episode. That specifically, I do really like that moment because that was like, again, we not only did we like through character, we made a character change, and it changed the plot, and it changed the message and the trajectory of everything. So yeah, because
he was the main protagonist. Like we were seeing the world through his eyes, and it wasn't working. And then we were like, well, we can't kill him halfway through the movie. Like he's the eyes we're seeing the world, and then we realize he's not. He was just an extra guy, and we're actually seeing it through the scientist guy and the daughter.
Yeah, he was a foil where the scientist guy was like a man-child, immature, needed to grow up. Again, a common theme for you and I to tell, should tell people where we're coming from, I think. And the things that we maybe think about a lot is like, you got to grow up, man. But that actually, he was a foil character that you got attached to, and as being like the protective father character, that the actual main character, the scientist guy, the immature guy, needed to rise up and take up that mantle. That was his arc.
But he couldn't take up the mantle while that other character was in the place of that. Yeah, which is very interesting.
Yep.
And you don't really realize that until you workshop your story.
Yep.
Piggybacking on the theme is like a dead body. I did have a quick question. What happens if the theme is buried too shallow or too deep?
Well, too shallow, you definitely get preachy. It's just like right
it's
there.
Too obvious. It's like stinking. You're like, I see exactly what you're trying to sell me.
That type of argumentation, like you see it in the Disney Plus shows and all sorts of stuff. Like there's stuff that nobody wants to watch nowadays. That the messaging is not only, I think, like I said this before, but like it's wrong. Like that's what people just intuitively are watching it and they're like, that's not true. Like it doesn't bear itself out. Like symbolically, I'm watching you do this and it's like, you just want to say this, but in the story world, you could probably say that. You could probably say that in some way, but you have to make it specific to those characters and in that story, you know, whereas you try and make things, rich people is another one. Like, I think in the most recent Batman film, Catwoman is like, oh, these rich guys are blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, okay. That's fine. You just need to really need to tell that story. You know, this is too shallow, is to just like slap on a slogan that like people in the real world might say about like, oh, eat the rich or whatever. She doesn't say that, but you know, just something that would signal, it's just virtue signaling where it's like, hey, my character, she feels the same way that you do, audience member. And it's like, yeah, but I haven't really seen that. Like that doesn't look like my experience at all.
That's a good point. Like if you analyze that, because that is a statement, and I think some people could easily agree or easily disagree. You could tell a story of a guy who's rich, who like, it's like big boss man goes home and then like is an alcoholic and cries. Totally. And it's like, and that's a more effective story in saying like, oh, money, like it's kind of shifts of like money can be damaging, you know,
Yeah,
like wealth can be damaging if not handled properly.
totally.
But like the whole story is built around that idea rather than it being like this like little shoehorn idea
Yeah,
that's just jutted
and
in.
the uh, film as a medium is like super individualistic. It's to get you to be empathizing with an
Hmm.
individual's story arc. So it's very hard to slap on a slogan that's like a group of people, like because that's just a generalization. So it's very hard. Like it's kind of counterintuitive within what film is to get you to empathize with a specific person.
Hmm.
Like, and of course you can empathize, you can leave the theater and be like, okay, I understand, leaving 12 years a slave. I can understand what the slave experience might have been like for someone at that time. Like,
Hmm.
that's an amazing thing. That's great. There's really no other thing on earth that allows you to be able to step into somebody else's shoes like that,
Hmm.
like film. So that's shallow though. Like when you're reaching for general application, general theme, like if you need to make it, the more general the theme, the more specific the character, basically. It's got to be, or other way around. Like, Luke Skywalker, the theme isn't super specific and neither is he.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I think we talked about him one time on the podcast where it's like, what is his flaw? Like he's kind of like a brash young man in A New Hope.
Yeah. Yeah, he's barely even brash. He doesn't really have any faults. And like I think the story around is just so fun and fantastical, but as a protagonist, I don't think he's my favorite protagonist because he just is like he doesn't really have the dark night of the soul where he's like, I'm not gonna be a Jedi anymore. Like he just is kind of
Well,
always the good
yeah,
guy a little bit.
that's true. He does and his arc does go across those three films.
I guess yeah, it's like the temptation, the draw to like join Darth Vader
Yep.
is like the subtle.
And the Emperor's like, you should kill me now. I actually just watched that scene the other day where he is like has his lightsaber or whatever, and they're standing within the big throne room thing,
Hmm.
and he's like tempting him to just do what his
Yeah.
flesh would tell him to do, is like take
Yeah.
revenge.
Yeah.
Strike me down now.
Yeah. And I get that that's like a trilogy, but in an individual movie, in his first movie, I feel like you need to give him a little bit more to
Mhm.
do, a little bit more of a mini arcs that happen within this big arc.
Yeah, and he has that. He loses his family
Hmm.
with Uncle Owen, and I can't remember his aunt's name, but they get totally torched by the stormtroopers.
Hmm.
And then he, in the second one, loses his friends.
Hmm.
At least the group gets like really separated. Obviously, Han gets put into carbonite, and then the third one is like them coming back together at the end.
Hmm.
So it's like him finding his people, basically, and that's why the second one, Empire Strikes Back, with Darth Vader saying, "I am your father," is such a big deal because it's like, join me, I am
Hmm.
your family. Like,
Yeah.
so it is about him finding his people. It's about a lot of these things, but it's not as specific as like, Luke is dealing with forgiveness.
Yeah.
If anything, it kind of happens off screen, like between the films, like in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Luke comes in and he's kind of just like stage
Hmm.
Jedi come Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
The third one, he's just like, he has reached this point where he understands. Anyway.
Speaking of that, do you think do stories have multiple themes playing at the same time, or does there always have to be like one main theme that's happening?
I think there's certainly a hierarchy, but the themes they probably come in bundles. It's like
That's
you
true.
can't talk about forgiveness without talking about guilt. So it's like by making a statement about this thing,
Hmm.
this emotional state or aspect of reality, this truth, you are saying about other things. But to double back about your question about shallowness, because that was all part of the shallowness thing.
Yeah. It becomes preachy.
Yeah, then if you bury theme too deep, then the story is lost.
It becomes more in that
it's wandering.
experimental realm where you don't actually know what's being said.
Which I'll lean on like a C.S. Lewis quote here, which is always a good thing to do, but about, he doesn't say theme. I think he's saying truth, but it works here too, that there's no such thing as like no theme. Like this story had no theme because theme is just point of view. It's like your point of view, what you are saying about reality. And so for you to point a camera at something, record it, take it into an editing timeline, dictate what shots are going to be seen at what time, showing me all these things. You are saying something about reality. It just might be muddled. It might not be clear. That doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
Even like Kowanakskatsi, the like experimental documentary that's like 9 hours long, which I think is like an Inuit word, something like that, about what is it, toiling, kind of just like hard work. I don't know, but there's like no dialogue in the film. It's just like 9 hours of just like B-roll of New York City and people just doing their thing, and there's like music, like kind of tribal music the whole time. And it's like, what's the point of that film? Well, I had like a super theme almost. It's like by being so brutally structured, it's like really trying to tell you something, even though it's not using words to do it, right? So yeah, if you go too deep, I think you could lose the audience, like, or your audience becomes, rest in peace, David Lynch, very, very deep thematic, subterranean thematic guy, like burying things so deep that it's really hard. But I've seen enough of his stuff to know that it's like he did have a point of view, and I do think he was saying things at certain times, and that's what earns him the following that he had. Is that it's like wine, like the deeper you go, the more you drink it, the more sophisticated your taste gets. So I do think that there are certain levels where it's like, okay, there's a level of sophistication, and then after that, if you go just so deep, then it's like it's like ditches on both sides of the road, basically. Like, you could go so deep that you lose people, and it's like it's just undetectable what you're actually trying to say, and people will resent you for that. Or it's like so shallow that people will resent you because it's so detectable. It's like, I can't even see the story because you're so busy, like in my face, whatever your theme is. This group of people sucks. This thing needs to change. This blah, 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 blah. This real world thing. It's like, why are you making a movie? Like,
why are you doing this?
Just, do your little sermon, do your little video essay, and that's it. So that's the risk of shallow deep.
Nice. I have just a few more questions, and then I also have, but before I want to do these final questions, I have a fun little theme quiz for you.
Oh, okay.
Just on some well-known movies. We don't have to belabor them, but like off the top of your head, like what do you think the quick theme is for these movies? So I've got 3 for you.
Okay.
First one is Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, the first one. First one where we first meet Elizabeth and Will and Jack.
That's a great question.
And I haven't thought of these either, so I will play with you as I'm trying to think through.
So certainly, well, one good place to always start when you're trying to find out what something's theme is the title. So you're just thinking about that, like Pirates of the Caribbean. Okay, obviously that's just the subject. But the Curse of the Black Pearl, so it's about trying to come out from underneath a curse. And okay, so how specifically, like, obviously we have the pirates who are cursed, and even a little bit, there's a story in there about Jack learning that he doesn't need to care about the real treasure was the friends he met along the way, and so, he's coming out from underneath the curse that is, avarice or greed. Learning to not be a pirate. 'Cause you even hear that in like, he's without a doubt the worst pirate I've ever seen. It's like, okay, but you have heard of me, whatever he says. That he's like letting go of that reputation and becoming more of a swashbuckling adventurer, and you see it a little bit too with the sub arc of Will Turner going from being like an upstanding guy to being a pirate. So a little bit there is like that being a pirate is subjective. I think that's kind of stupid, but
I think what it's trying to lead towards, which I don't know if I have a good phrase for it, is it's trying to lead towards this middle ground of like they portray like the stiff British guys as like, okay, they're not really good guys. Like they're like too hard on people. They're too strict. They're too whatever. But then they also don't paint Barbossa as a good guy either. So it's like this kind of like this promoting of like this idea of kind of like freedom to explore, but not freedom to like destroy, you know? It's like
that's a great analysis. Yeah.
Finding like the right amount of freedom And it's funny because that kind of comes into like Christianity, legal. Like, are you a legalist over here,
Yeah.
or are you like abusing your grace, and are you abusing your
Antinomian. Yeah.
your freedom? And it's like you shouldn't do either. Like you
Yeah.
should have like enjoy the freedom, but not take advantage of it.
Totally. A principled
Hmm.
freedom. You're
Yeah.
not just totally unleashed. That it's self-governance, I think, is the thing. Like you're not relying on someone else to govern you.
Hmm.
That's what a prisoner does. They've
Hmm.
lost their ability to govern themselves.
Hmm.
And so they end up in prison where somebody dictates everything they do throughout the day.
Hmm.
Whereas like if you have that by finding the conscience in you,
Hmm.
basically, I don't need the British government or whatever to tell me what it means to be good necessarily, because I
Hmm.
have that inside him. I'm governed inside by my conscience again. So yeah, I think that's a great analysis.
Nice. All right. Quiz number 2. Toy Story.
Toy Story. That reminds me of one line I thought of, and I think about this as a toy collector myself,
Hmm.
about how Toy Story is just um, about sentient landfill. That just like one day, like all of your things, it just tells you that you should care about your material things because they have life too, and you shouldn't feel bad about throwing things away. That's being like super cynical about it,
Hmm.
obviously,
Yeah.
like from the outside,
Hmm.
because it's used to push merchandise and that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
sell toys.
Yeah.
But I would say Toy Story is definitely about learning to change,
Hmm.
and that adopting change is not a bad thing
Hmm.
necessarily. And pride too. Like Woody is very prideful. He was
Hmm.
he was Andy's favorite, and then a
Hmm.
new one comes in. Oh, Buzz comes in. Oh man, I can't stand this, and he kills Buzz. Um,
Yeah, more or
or like
less, like
more or less, yeah,
in a kids movie, and then he realizes, yeah, it really is. I was gonna say pride as well. It's a story about pride and how it can destroy, and how
hmm
kind of like humility, like, and humility goes with accepting change and accepting
yeah,
different
yeah. The
circumstances.
humble heart.
Hmm.
And he could have been more hospitable to Buzz, obviously, and
Hmm.
becomes best friends with him.
Yeah.
So, I do think there's um, lots going on within Toy Story, of course,
Nice.
but that would be one of the main things is obviously humility and pride. Um, yeah.
Nice. My last one I have not seen, but I know you talk about a lot. So I want to get your perspective. Is Godzilla minus one.
Oh, yeah. Godzilla minus one.
So I can't speak to it because
Yeah.
I've not seen it yet. It's on my list.
There's a lot of great themes happening in there. I mean, the classic one with Godzilla obviously is that nuclear warfare is bad,
Mhm.
and that in this one you get more of a picture of the men of
Mhm.
Japan and how the war affected them and how they needed to move on. And they needed another. This would be my take on it. Would be like they needed another masculine effort besides the war to prove that because they had been beaten,
Mhm.
and so that to prove that they uh, are still men, basically by defending their homeland from the impending threat of Godzilla. So the main character is a kamikaze pilot, feels very guilty that he wasn't able to save a group of men, um, and so he is also a coward. He like ran away from killing himself. The
Mhm.
highest level of kamikaze honor is sacrificing yourself in battle, and he ran away from doing that. And so he gets a chance to do it again. But what's good about that film, and I won't spoil it, is just like how it handles that character dealing with those things, because it's like one of the most well-known aspects of Japanese culture is like seppuku and like kamikaze pilots in terms of warfare, the intensity involved with all of that. So like taking a look at the masculine Japanese spirit, and it's like, what does sacrifice actually look like?
Mhm. That's cool. I like that. Uh, what are your favorite themes that you like to see in stories?
Easy reach is always the emasculator plot.
Yeah, it's probably
That's our
those stories
term.
that we keep telling
Yeah.
is someone rising to the occasion because of
hmm
either cowardice or apathy. Usually they have to start kind of in one of those camps a
Yeah,
little
something
bit.
awakens in them and they're true, like it's a sincerity plot, to be honest. I think I've mentioned this before that we were in the age of sincerity, back in like early 2000s, and then it became the age of authenticity, and now we're in the age of profilicity, which is like curating a profile for yourself online, like not in real life social, like me to my parents, me to my children, like being a good father. That's the age of sincerity. Like I failed my role as a father. That's sincere. Authentic would be like true to myself. And so you can see those are kind of at odds with each other. Where it's like I want to be a good dad, but I also want to be an artist. And so like if I'm not true to myself, and those you see just like different stories and different themes through those ages, through those eras, I guess, kind of hitting those popular ideas that people are dealing with. Yeah, the age of sincerity is like the remasculator plot is focused on men realizing how men should act.
And not like not in a stereotypical, we're not saying like macho man.
No, like not like men will be men or boys will be boys type thing.
Yeah.
That's actually, lets men off the hook for bad behavior. It kind of goes back to your Pirates of the Caribbean thing about learning to be principled with the strength you have. One of my favorite things to talk about is Superman. Superman tells you how you should act when you're the strongest one in the room. That's like the theme of pretty much any Superman story. And so for something like Dig Deep, one of our favorite episodes early on, like the first remasculator plot was that you had an apathetic father figure who kind of has a mental break and then realizes he like rediscovers his masculine nature and is no longer passive, but he's choosing to be. He has to go through a little bit of like overcompensating in terms of like protective and like strong guy type behavior to then come out the other side and realize what it really meant to like bring his family back together as the dad.
Yeah, a healthy masculinity. Yeah. No, I think I like those themes too. I like themes about change, which is similar, like the idea that Toy Story where, hey, change can be good and change is beneficial for us.
Yeah.
And I also like themes that are pro-family. I like the movie About Time. I think I've talked about that before, where it's just like a very good family dynamic. And one could argue they're like, well, there's like no real tension in the family. It's like, yeah, but the family's not the main part of this story. Like they're kind of in the background, but it's almost like a side theme that it's like, hey, this family's supportive and they show up for each other. And we've talked about smiling friends. Like they're not cynical. They're not biting each other like Rick and Morty, where your family's always at odds to the point you're like, oh, the family is destructive and unhealthy. I like seeing like, I still want a movie to have some conflict and things happening, but it's refreshing to see a healthy family, and be like, oh, this is what a family can be.
Yeah. Well, and you can assert that a family can be something good by showing that parts of it are bad, or at least within the story. It's not saying you're saying that family is bad, but like, okay, I want my dad to act a certain way. Like I want him, like in the story, I want him to stop drinking because I have an idea of what a dad should be. And so does he, obviously. And he needs to come back into alignment with the sincerity aspect of like, with the role that he has within the family.
Yeah. And it's also not, for those who've seen About Time, there's a scene, mild spoilers, so feel free to fast forward 30 seconds, but his sister develops like, she becomes an alcoholic to a degree, and the movie's about him being able to go back in time and change things. So there's this part where he thinks he can just fix things for her, and then due to circumstances, he has the realization, he's like, I can't just fix this for her. She has to just muscle her way through it, but I can be there as a brother to help.
Yeah.
So like he has to take the harder road, but it's still the loving road. And I think like stuff like that is cool. Like it doesn't paint this picture that, oh, it's always going to be easy. Oh, you can just fix everything.
Yeah.
Because I think that's also a thing that a lot of families, even if they're great and healthy, want to just fix things for each other. And it's like, no, sometimes you just have to help them. You have to just be there for them through the thing, which I think is cool.
That's a great theme.
Yeah. My final question, Zach, is what advice would you give others as they're trying to iron out themes in their own stories? And I think we've hit on a lot of good stuff, but is there any nugget or two that someone's trying to write something, whether it be a comic book, a screenplay, a novel? What would you tell them as they're trying to use the theme properly?
I would definitely just practice would be one thing. That's like just raw as a craftsman. Just like you just need to be making scenes, writing scenes. And the thing with that is that you are actually just continually putting in front of your face what you believe. Because if you're forcing characters to say it or like deal with it or overcome it, whatever it is, there's something that you hear a lot in terms of writing circles is like you have to, one, write what you know, but what you know is dictated on how much you've lived. I know more today than what I knew yesterday, right? And especially now that I'm a double dad at this point. And I got bills to pay. I got kids to feed. And that helps shape everything. So in a lot of ways, I would say study philosophy and theology and just like think about life and study what people have said about the bedrock ideas of life so that you can better understand. My boss at work as a copywriter has told me you have to be clear before you can be creative. So you have to be able to clearly understand what it is that you're saying before you try and find a fun way to say it. A lot of people try and just rush to the creativity. They want to have a fun thing to say or show or do or whatever. And they miss the idea that like, okay, you're actually still just trying to communicate something though. There's somebody who's going to be consuming this on the other end. So yeah, I would go study and live life, go get some scars, go battle scar it up, and you will come away with a more interesting point of view. Like younger people, I guess, is really who I'm aiming at. And that's kind of what your question presupposed, like somebody who doesn't really, who's trying to grow,
Yeah.
And that applies to people who are veterans too, obviously. Like find places where you're uncomfortable and challenge yourself. Kind of a conversation that we've had off mic is that I'm going to be going to a dumb phone. And I actually confessed to a mutual friend of ours that I was like, it's actually kind of scaring me a little bit. And I'm like, but I just need to do that. Like, I don't care if it just like totally disrupts my life. Like it's actually, I believe it's that important that I'm not like just my face is in my phone all day or I'm losing hours and hours and hours. So time management would be kind of like a thin layer to that little anecdote too.
And all these things, all these life experiences, they don't necessarily have to be permanent. Like you don't have to go get a tattoo and be like, I'm doing this for the life experience. Like you could go a year with this dumb phone and be like, cool, I've learned a lot and I'm going to change to a normal phone again. But I do think, reading more, even if you don't like reading more fiction, reading more, like you can experience life through these stories in ways that maybe you don't have the opportunity to experience. That doesn't mean just sit there and binge and consume constantly, but it could be a helpful thing where you're like, oh man, these characters are really rich. And I don't have the opportunity to go do this, or it's historical and it puts you in a perspective of, I didn't grow up in this time and I can see how things were back then. As far as my advice, I would say write what you like, make themes that you believe in, which is like kind of goes without saying. I don't think someone's going to make a theme that's contrary to how they personally
I will say though,
believe.
personally as a writer, like I'll start writing things and it's like, I don't believe that. Like, what am I doing? And of course you can tell a story through the negative. Like you can say, hey, you can teach someone about mercy by having a really cruel story. So whatever, but there are things where it's like,
the theme is still saying that like revenge is bad. Like it's still, the theme is still something that you in your core believe, because I think it will be tricky to write something the opposite of like you're trying to promote an idea that you don't believe in. So that's more of a natural one. The other thing I would say is if you're trying to write or create and you're wanting to get better, learn to ask for sincere feedback from talented people, because none of these stories that we tell on here would be nearly as good if either of us were just doing it in a silo. And I talked to a coworker of mine about editing, because my job, we do a lot of edits and we do a lot of feedback. There's a lot of review Frame.io links and notes and just cut to the chase. It's like, hey, this moves too quick. Hey, this music doesn't fit here. And what I tell him and what I tell others is the notes never really feel good, especially when you're feeling pretty good about the edit. You're like, I can't believe they're telling me to change this thing. but the notes, if they're coming from competent people, almost always make the piece better. Like you get to the other side, you're like, this is better. So one, it helps you. The more you do that, the more you get thick skin, and you're able to do more of it, more of it, more of it, and make your stories better. But two, just ask sincerely from people, like the questions you want to know. You're like, hey, what do you think the theme is? What do you think I'm trying to say here? Is it coming off as preachy? How do you feel afterwards reading it? And if you're asking, I want honest, sincere feedback, you got to be willing to take it. You can't get butthurt if you're asking for it. But if they say it, they're like, yeah, it sounds like you're beating me over the head with this idea. I think you need to bury it a little deeper. Or I really don't know what you're trying to say. Or, hey, I get you're trying to make this point. I don't think you did a good job selling it. Like, I'm not convinced by the end of the story. Like, that's hard to hear, but do you want to like push out this like dinky bad story, or do you want to like refine it and make a better thing? Like put some armor on it and then release it out into the world. So feedback's huge. It's hard, especially at the beginning, because you're really precious of the stuff. But the sooner you can learn, like, hey, this is not my identity they're attacking. This is a separate entity of a thing I'm making, and they're poking holes in that, and I can fill those holes.
To that point, it can be you, because you really believe it. You know, if I really believe, what about revenge? And then somebody's like, no, and they start challenging you. You realize that's actually what the point of these stories is, to get people to see something differently. It's an argument. These are arguments we're talking about. That's what a dialogue is. And so if you find really contrasting points of view, don't just ask people who agree with you on things like whether the film was effective. Like ask people who probably don't agree with you. Because that's you're at the end of the day, you're trying to at least persuade somewhat, not just entertain, that like this maybe is the way things should be. Of course, it's entertaining first, so it's not like trying to again beat you over the head. But
yeah, I'd say be studious about it, because if you present it and they poke holes in it, more than likely your argument, it might not be the theme that's the problem. It's your argument that you're presenting it is the problem and weak. If you keep doing it and it keeps getting holes, maybe your theme is weak. Maybe you're like, I'm arguing you should eat McDonald's every day of your life. Maybe it's a weak theme, or you are arguing that it's like, maybe you're like dark and brooding and you're thinking, I think people should get revenge. You can make a movie like that, but if your friends are poking holes, they're like, well, it seems like the character, if you keep writing it and they're like, well, the character always ends in a bad place, or like the character wins and it doesn't feel believable because they forgot about their family and their pursuit. If your story keeps breaking, it might be like maybe the theme's not strong enough, or there's not a lot of truth to the theme.
That's exactly right. I mean, and there's a difference between your theme being wrong. So like you saying something that's just completely wrong, like human life doesn't matter. I mean, there's people who actually do have that theme, that nihilistic theme of just like, none of this matters. It's very cynical. It's like, why do I need to watch a movie to whatever? Anyway. But then there's the craft aspect of it too. Like, how effective was I in communicating this theme? And because you could, again, have like a rock solid theme that pretty much everybody universally agrees on. And the way you've chosen to express it is not very good, or it's muddled and it's unclear, and you were too creative. So you need to raise up the level that you've buried that body to make it more clear in certain areas. A really bad example is Will Smith in Suicide Squad. What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? Like the theme just comes so up to the surface. But like a good version of that though, like there, good moments in films where they either say the title or they say like a really effective thing. We talk about it all the time. Every episode we try and come up with a line of dialogue, and it's usually in this type of thing. It's a thematically packaged moment. It's like, okay, punchy, like this is what is being said. And we know it when we hear it, like whether it's good or not. But
usually it's not preachy. Like it is encapsulating what's being said, but in the movie surrounding it, it's not just like, greed is bad.
Yes.
Like it's tied into the narrative.
It's contextual. It's the character saying like, I love you, Dad, but I just wish you weren't as rich. Or I think I would have loved you more if you didn't character, whatever. I'm just coming up with a line, but just I'm making it contextual to the character. And that's what makes it impactful. So yeah.
Well, that's Theme, everybody. I wanted to talk about this because I thought it sounded interesting, and I was hoping I would learn some stuff, and I think I did. So Thank you for chatting, Zach.
Thanks for the questions, man.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Story is just such an interesting thing, and we've been telling stories since the beginning of time, and there's techniques. There's things that make it better. There's things that make it more effective, and theme is definitely one of them. It's the backbone of your story. So having a good, clear theme, and then knowing how deep to bury it will really help your story shine. So we appreciate you guys. If you have any other thoughts on theme or anything, drop us a comment on YouTube or send us a message through our links in the description. And any closing remarks on theme, Zach, before we let these guys go on with their day? No, take us out of their ears.
Yeah, no, just don't be afraid to dig deep.
Yeah, go check out Dig Deep. That was a good one. The other one, I will, to plug ourselves again, I think The New Hire is also a good one when it comes to theme. It's about a new guy, and then there's like aliens that are like feeding off the creativity in the people in the workplace. But that one I remember specifically, we have like 3 characters, and you pointed out that they're all reacting to the same theme differently, which gives you this perspective of like, they're all looking at the same thing and seeing it differently. And it gives a really cool, like, understanding of the world, Yeah.
Like I mean, that's what makes it feel fully fleshed out, fully orbed exploration of the theme. And so, yeah, I agree. New Hire is a fantastic one for that as well. So I'd love to hear from you folks. Send us messages. I mean, if you completely disagree, I'd love to hear that. Kind of getting to the point and the theme of this episode.
The theme. We're no experts, like I said at the beginning, but this is just from our experience in the past, what works and what we try to do. But we want to hear others' opinions. Hopefully this is helpful to someone who's trying to get a little better at writing and creating and stuff.
Yep.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we will catch you in the next one.
See ya.
Thank you all for listening to StoryFellas, a part of the Pemmican Studios podcast network. Check out our show notes for bonus material, links, and more. To find out more about our current projects, send us messages, and suggest ideas for the show, go to StoryFellasPodcast.com. If you liked what you heard, share the show with a friend. Word of mouth is the best way to grow this community. Until next time, go make and break those stories.